I've always closely followed what's been happening in Fiji, and it really annoys me the way the media portrays Fiji, in particular the way they portray yourself, the Prime Minister, and others, when in actual fact, from what I can see and from my own contacts with people who are in business here, from people who live in New Zealand but come back from time to time, the overwhelming feeling that I get is that the changes that have been made are for the better for Fiji. For the future, it's what's needed to be done in order to progress Fiji in the region and to really become actually autonomous and the masters of your own destiny. Is that a fair assessment of what I'm picking up?
Yeah, I suppose, from one perspective you have the sort of neo-colonial sort of analysis.
Yes.
The other one, of course, is basic substantive justice within the country. And I think at a philosophical level, it's not just in Fiji, but I think overall at a global level, I think we are more prone to looking at form rather than substance.
Yeah.
So you have countries that may have a parliament, for example, but the whole country has enormous problems, corruption, lack of adherence to rule of law, etc. But because these issues are so fundamental in its form, and they're such fundamental issues that affect the governance of that country, it's too difficult a case for people to handle, or to talk about or address, in particular by countries who are observing, in particular, for example, by development partners. So what they go for is more the form. So they say, they've got a parliament, they've got
it appears to be a democracy, but the underlying issues...
Yeah, but what they'll say, they've got a parliament, they've got a judiciary, that's all fine. Right. But they know themselves that perhaps the methodology of the election of the members of parliament is not correct, is not truly democratic, that the judges actually are compromised. But they don't want to deal with it because it means they have to change the power nexus or the basis of that country. Now, so what is actually happening? So we have this sort of lip service to democracy. Is it truly democratic? Are people truly being treated equally? Just because you sign up to some convention, are you actually adhering to that in practice?
Yeah.
Wonderful to set up a human rights commission, but how is it functioning? Wonderful to have an NGO that will talk to you about human rights abuses, but in other instances they won't tell you because they themselves are tainted, or ethnically aligned, or politically aligned, whatever the case may be. So I think in Fiji, yes, at one level, it's Fiji trying to, people see, Fiji trying to assert its own independence, sovereignty vis-a-vis Australia and New Zealand, whatever the case may be. And yes, it is at that level. But I think more fundamental than that is what the Prime Minister has been saying, is that we need to address some of the fundamental issues within the country itself. And there are some people who are very much, and it includes some NGOs, who are very much shackled, if you like, to the old cronyism, to the elitism, to the old power structures.
But those power structures, in some respects, were created by the British. Like the Great Council of Chiefs, for example.
Yes, they were created, but let's not blame the Brits for everything. Yes, they were there, and once a country becomes independent, of course, then it's in the hands of the locals. But of course, the elites who benefit from that won't want to change the structures.
Yes, well, in New Zealand at the moment, there's constitutional debate going on about some changes that we're wanting to make. I've been interested to observe how you're going through your own constitutional debate. I noticed in the radio, in the car on the drive down here, there's advertisements, every 15 minutes encouraging people to come along and participate in the debate. How's that debate going?
Well, we've been saying right from day one, and you see, even if when you had the Sir Paul Reeves Commission, And if you look at the report and if you look at some of the literature that's come out of it, Yash Ghai wrote a book together with 4 others. I've got I can't find it. Where they have actually looked at the Reeves Commission report. This is basically a book about constitution making and reform. I've got another copy where I had actually marked where references to Fiji, where during the Reeves Commission, a lot of ordinary Fijians did not have access to the commission. Or they would go there, but they would sit quietly, they would not say anything. They thought they could not speak. They did not have a copy of the 1990 Constitution at that time, which was being reviewed.
Yes.
So,
which was the constitution that was imposed on Fiji by Rambuka.
Absolutely. I mean, I remember listening to the radio at midnight. It just sprung out of the blue.
We're now a republic.
Well, yeah, but more so that it set in place a very skewed constitution that was actually based on race at that time, or ethnicity, where it had restrictions on Fijians of different origins or ethnicity from having access to certain public offices. It had a communal system of voting, entirely communal system of voting. Anyway, the point is that the PM has been saying from day one, we want the ordinary Fijians to go and make submissions.
Which is anybody who was born in Fiji,
absolutely,
lives in Fiji, is a Fijian.
There are some naturalized Fijians too.
Yeah,
they can make a submission too, but we do not necessarily want, as was seen previously. This book makes a reference to it. We generally have political parties also who just profess to speak for everybody else. Or political parties, what they'll do is, for example, they may have 15 people. They write up the submission. So every center that the commission appears, you'll have one of the representatives saying the same thing.
Saying the same thing.
And in fact, that was discovered in the SDL submission. It has come out in the open forum, and PM has also made reference to that, how the same submissions will be, made by different people. So the idea is to get as many ordinary Fijians to come and make submissions, as whatever it is. Then one can talk about anything, and we've been constantly saying this. Even if it's about the past, about the present, about the future, but of course with the view that we need to be focused on the future.
Yes.
There's been no restriction saying you cannot criticize anybody. You cannot say anything about the past, or about the present even. Do not like the Attorney General, say it. What is your view on the Constitution? You do not necessarily have to talk about things in a legalese term. You can basically say, I want better roads and schools. I think that we should have more syringes in our island hospitals, whatever the case it is. Because I think a lot of these will then need to be translated into constitutional speak.
Yes.
Fiji, for example, under the previous constitution had a Bill of Rights, but it stopped short of enshrining economic and social rights into the Bill of Rights. Now South Africa has done that, right to basic housing, potable water, medical facilities. Now, personally I believe that should be in it. Because if you look at the struggles in Fiji since '87 or even prior to that, has been on socioeconomic issues, has been on access to basic resources, and in fact the skewering up of the constitution, the skewering up of the political system has fundamentally meant, irrespective of ethnicity, the people who do not have access to power or are not well connected are the ones who suffer the most.
And miss out, yeah. I noticed in the drive down on a number of bus stops and also some signs, there's a real big push on reporting corruption.
Absolutely.
And Chris talked to me about the establishment of the Independent Commission Against Corruption. Have you seen a real change in the thinking on the street on tolerance for corruption?
Yeah, I think there's a far less tolerance of corruption.
It takes time, yeah.
It takes time, but I think there is far less tolerance, by the ordinary people, or their willingness to come forward to report it.
Yes.
It's like domestic violence. You can say that women should come, and predominantly the people against whom violence is perpetrated against are women and children.
Yes.
You can say to the women, come and report it. But if they do not feel confident in the system,
that the system's going to represent them properly
and provide redress
and safety,
exactly, then they won't come forward. Now, we brought about the domestic violence decree, a specific law in respect to that. It had been actually languishing somewhere in the corridors of the Law Reform Commission. But we basically picked it up, dusted it, tweaked it, made it applicable to contemporary society, and we implemented it. There was no political will to implement it previously for the past 20 years. In the same way, for example, the Family Law Act, it had a provision originally that spouses of a de facto relationship should be entitled to spousal maintenance. Now, the Fiji women's rights movement at that time did a deal with the then government, the Garasi government, and they took the provision out. Now, it was a deal, and of course there are different power, relationships that existed between people like Imrana Jalal, who was with women's rights movement, and her husband, who was, came from Garasi's office, who then became the CEO of AFL, etc. There's all those sort of relationships. Anyway, they did that deal. Obviously, disenfranchising women who had de facto relationships. Now, but also at the same time, many people will tell you that perhaps the leaders at that time also had de facto relationships which they did not want to, pay maintenance for. But we brought that about. Now, the unfortunate thing is, digressing a bit, this women's rights movement that is essentially there to create, or was created to advocate for the rights, in particular legal rights for women, has not, for the past couple of years, notwithstanding all these reforms that have been made empowering women, not once have they said that this is, have they recognized publicly that this is something positive.
There was something,
because they are politically aligned. They've politically taken a position, and therefore they have in fact undermined their own very mandate. Because if you, for example, an advocate for child rights or women's rights or poor groups, if you have a government that implements policy that fulfills your mandate, fulfills your objective, and there should be a recognition of it.
yes,
Now, they have failed to do that. So, you see, and also I think it brings about another important point. There are some people in Fiji Times, and Mick Beddoes made a comment the other day saying, well, we can't call everybody Fijian unless people all have a say and they don't want to be called Fijian. Please. That's a given. If you were to live in Australia, if you're born in Australia, citizen of Australia, you're an Australian. Do you need everybody in Australia to go and vote on it?
no,
Right? In the same way as when you assume leadership, you have to advocate for certain things that are just, that are right. We had the Fiji Times, one of the Fiji Times editors telling me once, because they refused to use the word Fijian to apply to everybody. This is
but
why
I'm a Fijian just as much as you are. I don't live in Fiji now, but I was born here.
you're born here.
Yeah.
Now the reality also is, you'll never see, for example, now I think it's changing, the Fiji Times would not ever say the Fijian economy. They quite happily will say the Australian economy,
Yeah,
but they will say the Fiji economy, the Fiji people, the Fiji man. But as soon as they have to refer to Australia, America, whatever they say, the American economy, the Australian economy, the Australian man died in Kiribati, whatever the case may be. But they've got this mindset. So they said to me, oh, people have not voted for it. If we were to tomorrow, you go out and take a survey of all the men in Fiji and say, do you think you can beat up your wife? I can tell you, perhaps now with some education, there is slight change. If you did it 3-4 years ago, there'd be a very healthy number of men who would probably say yes.
or unhealthy as the case may be.
Yeah,
Yeah.
They'll say yes.
Yeah.
They'll say yes, we have a right. There are still women who believe that their sons aren't doing the right thing because they don't beat their wives enough. But as leaders, as lawmakers, as policy decision makers, that's the right thing.
Yeah.
So people need to follow the culture. In the same way, Gough Whitlam, for example, gave rights to Aborigines
Yes.
in Australia in '72 with the Land Rights Act, etc. Now, if he had gone over and got all the hardcore rednecks to vote on it, do you think they would have agreed to that? Of course not.
I notice also that you changed the law with respect to gay Fijians, and previously there was rather harsh sentences if you were convicted of carnal knowledge, I think is the correct term. What's the legal position now on homosexuality in
You see,
Fiji?
in fact, that position was also there with the 1997 Constitution. Under Section 38.2 of the 1997 Constitution, it had a whole gambit of areas in which you couldn't discriminate against people. It included sexual orientation.
So you've removed that now?
No, that was there.
Yeah.
That basically meant that you said you couldn't discriminate against people based on their ethnicity, gender, age, sexual orientation.
Yes.
So what that basically meant was that any laws that contradicted that were contrary to the Constitution.
Yes.
And because the Constitution is the supreme law, therefore they need to be removed. However, the Constitution specifically provided for a proviso to that, saying that the Marriage Act, notwithstanding this provision, the Marriage Act still stands.
Yes.
The Marriage Act is a union between a man and a woman.
So it's the same in New Zealand. We've got this debate happening at the moment.
So that's the legal position. The legal position is basically a continuation of 38.2, which is that the homosexuality is decriminalized.
Right.
The Penal Code had that provision. There was a very famous case. In fact, after the 1997 Constitution was put in place, in fact, in early 2000 or later part of 2000, a person had been charged. The magistrate decided to sentence him, but on an appeal to the High Court, I think Justice Winter, who actually said no, the Constitution is in place, and therefore that overrides that criminal provision in the Penal Code.
Yeah.
So through the crimes decree now, it's a decriminalization of homosexuality. But of course, any sexual act, whether it's homosexual or heterosexual, in a public place is still criminalized.
Of course.
Yeah. But in respect of the
what happens in people's homes,
yeah,
it's up to them.
The legal position is that marriage is still a union between a man and a woman. Homosexuality is decriminalized.
Do you think that's going to change in terms of the Marriage Act? As I said, this debate is happening in New Zealand at the moment. There's a private member's bill before the Parliament where basically they're trying to bring marriage equality, saying that a marriage is between two people who want to have commitment.
I think that's an issue for the new Parliament to decide.
Right. Yeah. No, it's fascinating to watch from the outside. In New Zealand, we have our views coloured by the lens of the media.
Yeah.
And I have other sources on what is happening in Fiji, and I look at what the media report, and I look at what's actually happening there, and I thought it was time for me to come up here and actually come and meet people and talk to them and see what the progress is and how things are moving forward. Did you hear what Phil Goff had to say on Friday?
No, I didn't.
In the lead up to the
So I was put this on silent. Please keep talking.
In the lead up to the South Pacific Forum, Phil Goff, the former Foreign Minister, came out and said that before any serious debate over Fiji can happen, Fiji needs to have an independent judiciary, needs to respect basic human rights, needs to have freedom of the press, and these sorts of things, with no evidence to support any of those things. And talking with Christopher Pride today, it's very clear to me that the judiciary or the justice system is free and independent from any political interference on that front. So I'm struggling to understand what Phil Goff is on about on that. In terms of human rights, again, the discussion with you and with others that I've had in the last day appears that Fiji's quite a long way advanced in extending basic human rights of the kind that we enjoy in New Zealand to all Fijians. What's your view on what Phil Goff had to say?
Look, we're kind of getting used to this statements, comments being made by various individuals or groups based predominantly in Australia and New Zealand that are not based on facts. But unfortunately also, you see, in a way, I kind of sympathize with them because they are just listening to a handful of people in Fiji who are spreading these lies simply for their own political agenda. I'll tell you, give you a classic example. Felix Anthony. Right? Felix Anthony is a trade unionist, full-time trade unionist. He was appointed to the Fiji National Provident Fund Board by the Prime Minister, in 2007. He was fine, he was supportive of the government, because he was on the board. In fact, when the Constitution was abrogated on April the 9th, 2009, he rang me up. I was here at this desk. I was here with Christopher Pride, who was then Solicitor General, and the current acting Solicitor General, and I put my phone on speaker. So, well, AG, what had to be done was done, etc. Don't worry, we're here supporting you. I'll talk to my friends, in Australia. Don't worry, we're here to support you. The minute he was removed for various practices at FNPF from the board, his entire tune changed. You see, you go and look at the facts. Up till then, the trade union movement in Australia, in New Zealand to that extent, were very quiet. Not much noise being made. In fact, I met one of the ACTU, I think her name is Sharon Burrows. Felix brought her over here to the conference room next door. Discussed things, blah, blah, blah. They were very quiet. But as soon as Felix is out of the
trough,
he goes berserk.
And then gets all his
mates because
from,
the fraternity is actually quite small. It's a very close-knit grouping. In the same way, you have various NGOs that talked about human rights abuses, but very minor things. Yet in 2000, when there were blatant human rights abuses taking place, because they were targeted against, at that particular point in time, against one ethnic group, they remained mum. They were silent.
Well, I weigh up what Phil Goff has to say on Fiji, and a lot of politicians in New Zealand, and I'm pleased to see it's changing now, have this motherhood and apple pie view about what Fiji should be. But on the other side, they're signing up free trade agreements with non-democratic countries with human rights abuses like China, like Thailand, Pakistan, and they're not saying anything about those countries, but we have this quaint insistence of telling Fiji off in New Zealand.
Bully the little Pacific Islanders, basically. Pervez Musharraf was given red carpet treatment in 2007.
By Helen Clark.
Look at the irony of that.
She gave him a full state dinner, and he was a military dictator.
Look at the irony of that. ADB, from what I've told, increased their loan funding after Pervez Musharraf took over 7-fold. Because of Australia and New Zealand, Fiji does not get or has not received any new funding from ADB since 2007, when it specifically we asked for roads, water, bridges.
Well, I had a discussion with a person in the hotel this morning, and I was watching Australian news, and they were saying, Bob Carr was saying that he's wanting Chinese investment in Australia. And the person I was talking to, a business person here in Fiji, they were saying, oh no, we don't want Chinese investment. Same in New Zealand, we don't want Chinese investment. I said to them, well, hang on a second. The alternative to that is aid, which is tagged with countries like New Zealand and Australia telling you how to run your country. Whereas Chinese investment is not tagged. They don't care how you run your country, and they certainly don't tell you how to do it. What's your choice? In some respects, the sanctions that were in place and the shunning by Australia and New Zealand has allowed Fiji to stand on its own 2 feet and make your own way without anybody looking over your shoulder. Do you feel that's an accurate portrayal?
I think the fact that Australia and New Zealand... Sorry, I'll take my boss. Hello. Hello, PM. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, so I was just asking whether or not those sanctions have actually enabled Fiji to take stock and look at itself and think we can do this on our own.
You know, it's very interesting. I said we had a dinner. PM had hosted dinner for, we had this foreign ministerial contact group.
Yes.
I think at the time Winston Peters was around and Stephen Smith from Australia. And I said to Stephen Smith at that restaurant, Tico's, I said, Fiji is very closely aligned to Australia and New Zealand by the very fact that there are so many Fijians who have migrated to Australia and New Zealand. Fijians play rugby in those countries. A lot of them have been educated there. We go there for medical treatment. 67% of our tourism arrivals come from Australia and New Zealand. Very close links. I said, so it's not like we are shunning you. We've never shunned Australia and New Zealand. They are the ones who've shunned us. But by them getting out of the space, they've created a void. The void needs to be filled. But at the same time, and you're absolutely right, it has also made Fiji look to the globe. Fiji has now formed more diplomatic relationships over the past 2 years than it's done since independence, from what I gather. We have got scholarships given to us from Morocco, Cuba. Students are going to Malaysia, India, China. We've opened up, and the PM is opening an embassy next week in United Arab Emirates. Open an embassy in South Africa, Brazil, Indonesia, Korea. These are all the new ones.
So you've got a global view rather than a South Pacific centric view.
We've joined the non-aligned movement. So, but it does not mean that we're going to shun anybody. We want to work with everybody. And Fiji has also, notwithstanding the fact, for example, even the World Bank is not giving us any money because of the veto powers of Australia and New Zealand, in particular Australia. Asian Development Bank has not given us any new money. But if you look around the countryside, there's a lot more infrastructure development than when the previous governments had access to ADB. Can you imagine for a minute the amount of infrastructure development that would have taken place if we had access to that funding? And that has been the focus of the Bainimarama government. One of the key focus of the government has been that we show the people of Fiji that this is what a government should be doing for you. That this should be a level of expectation. We give free textbooks, subsidized bus fares to kids below a particular income level.
Yep.
We've included a food voucher program for those people receiving family assistance allowance. All these things have been done. We have now reduced our deficit to 1.9%. Our foreign reserves have never been higher. We've got now about 5.5 months worth of import.
Sounds like you could tell Bill English a few things.
Our Standard and Poor ratings have gone up. So, it goes to demonstrate that notwithstanding the challenges we've had vis-a-vis the civil service, the pressures from outside, the lack of access to a complete sort of financial market because of the restrictions placed by Australia and New Zealand, we are still able to do these changes.
In some respects, it's strengthened you.
Of course, it's made us be more resourceful, but without compromising standards. In fact, we've increased standards. We've ratified the United Nations Convention Against Corruption, unreservedly. We put ourselves up for the peer review program. First review was carried out by France and Serbia. Last one was done by USA and Bangladesh. They only put the first one and the second one.
It's kind of interesting getting France to come and inspect you on corruption.
That's what they send us. But the point is that we have not been in any way hesitant in putting ourselves for the peer review. One of the comments was that you people were really open about it. They said we go to other countries where people try and hide things. For us, the approach was, yes, there is corruption, but we want it fixed up.
Well, you've got an independent commission against corruption now. New Zealand doesn't have that still.
You've got a serious fraud office or something, isn't it?
Well, they've got a serious fraud office, but they only look at fraud. What do you do in terms of political corruption? What do you do in terms of local government with councils, with tendering processes? It's not fraud. They can't really look at it. It's actually not fraud, but it's corruption. there, there's Transparency International says that New Zealand's one of the least corrupt countries in the world. Well, I don't know how they get that. They must sit in their office and write the reports, because I can detail endless amounts of types of corruption. Again, talking on that corruption, in New Zealand, the media would have us say that the last elections that were held in Fiji were free and fair. My information that I...
Do you have a copy of the EU report?
I've read a copy of the report. I don't have one with me.
I can give it to you. Una? Can I have a copy of the EU report, please, the marked up one?
But I was getting feedback of people going around villages and delivering outboard motors and tractors, and those sorts of things.
Buying votes.
Buying votes.
Yeah, I mean, and the thing is, for example, but even the election process itself, this report, which notwithstanding the anomalies they found, they said it's credible, voter turnout of 101%.
101%.
In one constituency, in one level. 101%. 9.5% of the votes were deemed to be invalid. 20,000 mistakes in the electoral roll.
Well, part of that process, I've been saying to the New Zealand government, is that instead of putting in place blockages for Fiji, perhaps we could have assisted in methodologies for completing a census properly. Completing a census properly, so that you know how many voters you've got in a particular area. I noticed the video that's been put out regarding the voter registration system, where you're having photo IDs for voter registration.
Yes.
In New Zealand, we still post out an identification card that has no photo identification at all.
Oh, really?
That anybody can use, because it doesn't have a signature or anything like that. You just go along to the polling booth and hand over the card, and that's supposedly who you are. So I'm looking at the process that you guys are going through,
yeah,
in bringing in place photo identification, voter registration that's robust and not able to be corrupted or fraudulently manipulated. And I'm thinking that perhaps New Zealand could learn something from Fiji.
Well, we use the Canadian company called Coding. They've been, we had called for international tenders, and they've been doing this sort of thing for 20 years. They last year registered, I think, people in Gambia. They registered 800,000 people. And this is biometrics. So you take a photograph and you take your thumbprint.
Yep.
Precisely to get away, I'm just trying to look for the 71% stuff. Precisely to get away, here we go. Read that.
What's the OSE?
Office of Supervisor of Elections.
Right, so like our Electoral Commission, to not provide an official explanation for a voter turnout of 101% in that constituency. The official register of voters of the OSE stated 7,639 registered voters in the constituency. The total number of registered voters was actually 9,012. All the used ballot papers and the corresponding paperwork, as well as the unused ballot papers, were properly and securely packed, but only sealed with the usual wax seal, which did not provide sufficient protection. Numbered plastic seals went missing during this process.
There's so many,
that's one example.
We've sort of highlighted in yellow the bits from the report, and we've in fact been using this as a guidance as to how not to do things. As a guide, I should say.
As a guide on how not to do things and how to put in place strategies to combat that.
Absolutely. Like for example, you see that when you're counting votes, you have there's one of the constituencies. There's a first count. There's a vote difference of about 9. You're supposed to order a recount.
Yeah.
The returning officer refused to do it. When you see the way that they have centralized counting centers. So Suva Grammar School down here is used as a counting center. You have ballot boxes coming from different areas, and they reconcile it. So they say, okay, all the ballot boxes are in, reconcile, there's 90 boxes. And then they commence counting. Now, after voting commences, you don't bring in any other ballot boxes because the reconciliation has been done. In this constituency, they allowed another 6 to come in.
From where?
God knows. Your guess is good as mine. The returning officer allowed it. So we need very strict laws. In fact, see, we this year also agreed to have the UN needs assessment team to come in to look at our needs for elections. So we're very much focused on things like, we've been using wooden ballot boxes. We don't need to use wooden ballot boxes. We need to have ballot boxes that is, you cannot tamper with, or if somebody does tamper with, it's been tampered with.
Yes.
It needs to be clear, so ballot papers are going in. The very basic things. We need to draft a whole set of rules and laws, regulations, to say what happens when X, Y, Z happens.
So it's funny you talk about ballot boxes. In New Zealand, the ballot boxes are cardboard.
Oh, really? Well,
everyone puts their vote into it. It's a cardboard box.
Yeah. Well, maybe you want to trust each other a lot. But, I think the international practice now is those clear ballot boxes,
yes.
The plastic ones. And, when you sort of put it in, it sort of goes in that manner so nobody
so
can
you
put
can't
their hand
fish
in.
it out.
Yeah.
And
All that sort of thing. And that's what we want, you see, because at the end of the day, when you have a credible system, first of all, if you have a credible electoral system that does not discriminate people or differentiate the citizens along the ethnicity, whatever, and then you have a system that actually has integrity, that is credible, the process, then when a government is elected or party wins seats, majority seats, and forms government, it has credibility.
And then
when you have credibility, then there is acceptance by the entire population.
And then you can move forward.
Absolutely.
Without the legacy of the
That
past.
is critical. That is critical.
And it's not going to happen overnight.
No, but it can happen in the next elections.
Yeah.
You must have a system that is completely credible.
But you have to get all of that in place before you have those elections. Otherwise, that election is illegitimate, basically.
I can tell you there's a lot of work to be done. And these people
How are you going on the timetable?
Well, if you look at the 1 July Strategic Framework for Change that the PM announced in 2009,
yes.
In that he had stated that the consultations on the Constitution will begin in September 2012. We are ahead of the game. September is now the corner, but the Commission is already on its way, doing their work.
So there's a number of people out there who don't think that elections will be held in 2014.
Yeah, well, the number of people who think that Elvis is still alive.
He is, isn't he? He lives with Salman Rushdie.
I don't know. I thought he was with Obama, but I don't know. But the point is that we can't be distracted by these people who make all sorts of comments.
Well, they're all sitting in other countries and not in Fiji.
And the proof is in the eating of the pudding. And unfortunately, you see, I think it is now a philosophical battle. This is why it's very interesting. You'll see that Mahendra Chaudhry, Mick Beddoes, NFP for what it's worth. Nobody really knows who's running NFP. There's probably only about 2 people who are sort of the main names. And the others have formed a coalition against the PM.
Yeah. And the SDL's involved in that too.
Of course.
Yeah.
The Labour said we're forming a coalition with SDL said we're forming a coalition with, Mick Beddoes, etc. Because it's a philosophical battle. The reason we've done that is that it's a fight between the old and the new. It's a group of politicians who have held office, enjoyed the benefits of holding office through a skewed electoral system. Here you have a Prime Minister who's saying...
Who is ethnically Fijian, saying one vote, one person, one vote.
Absolutely. Who is saying there must be common equal citizenry. We must have a secular state. We must have a true democracy, substantive justice, truly independent judiciary, voting age to be 18. All these things.
Standard things that other countries enjoy.
Yeah. See, the irony is that these guys on one side are now being supported by Australia and New Zealand. They are harbouring people who are against the Bainimarama government. Your journalists are supporting these people. Your trade unions are supporting these people. who are now only giving lip service to labour law, labour rights, etc. But once in power, you watch them, and they've proven that. What did Garasi do for the workers of Fiji?
He might have given them a few outboards and some tractors.
No, but in terms of the trade unions, etc.
No.
You see, I mean, the reality is, and that this is the irony, that Australia and New Zealand and some of the other countries are supporting these people, notwithstanding the fact that Australia and New Zealand subscribes to the principles that the Prime Minister is advocating.
But the three constitutions that Fiji has lived under since independence have all had pretty major flaws. The first constitution, obviously, for independence.
Yeah.
The second one that Rambuka put in place, and of course the Paul Reeves constitution, all didn't treat every Fijian citizen as equal. The new constitution is it the goal to have that as the primacy, that everyone who wants to be a Fijian is a Fijian?
I think that's more of a given. But in terms of the electoral system, yes, this is for the first time in Fiji's history where you have a Prime Minister who's saying everybody's a Fijian. Unequivocally. Everybody's Fijian. Common equal citizenry. You can run a modern nation state based on that. The example I always use is Obama. Obama's father is Kenyan. Mother's American. But he's the most loyal American you've got out. He's the president.
Yeah,
Right.
that's right.
So, in Fiji, it's very historical what people are saying. It's actually quite groundbreaking. In a way, it's quite tragic that we see it as groundbreaking that you have a Prime Minister saying everybody's Fijian when it should be generally accepted everywhere else.
Especially in the year 2012.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But here you have SDL making submissions saying no. Mick Beddoes of all people saying no. They should be called Fiji Islanders and others can be called Fijians. The Itauke. How warped is that?
I mean, just on the drive down, take Round Nandi for example, there's a small Muslim population. Obviously the person who owns one of the stores there has a halal policy in place. I understand that. Yourself, you're a Muslim, I understand. But there's also plenty of Hindus here, plenty of Christians in different denominations. The Prime Minister's view is that the government should be secular. Leave the churches outside of that. It appears the SDL has a very close relationship with the Methodist Church.
Well, I mean, yes and no, but I think that, it's always good to have God on your side to win your battles. It's not something peculiar to Fiji, and they do it in Malaysia, they do it in lots of other countries, where they've used religion to further a ethnic cause or a political cause. I think we should not really get distracted by that, but I think the main function of the new thing in this constitution should be, as the Prime Minister said, is that the electoral system must not differentiate on the basis of ethnicity or any other demarcators. Everybody is a Fijian. So you go and vote as a Fijian. It does not mean a person will not vote along ethnic lines, religious lines, provincial lines, whatever it is, gender lines, disability lines. They may, but they have a choice. That is the feature. They have a choice. Previously, you were firstly categorized. You were categorized and you were forced to vote along ethnic lines and also choose from a limited pool of people. In this system, you will also have the positive effect because as a political party, the very nature of a political party is always to maximize the number of seats you win.
Yes.
So if you are going to have communal voting, a lot of parties will be predicated on ethnicity. Their formation, the genesis will be based on ethnicity. But if the system says there's no longer ethnic voting, so if you form a political party, if you have a political party, and assuming you have multi-member constituency, you will try and field as many different types of candidates as possible.
Well, you'll create a trans-Fiji
to have a
appearance.
cross-section appeal. You may not necessarily subscribe to that idea.
Or even be successful.
No, but you may not necessarily subscribe to that idea. But you, by very nature, as being the beast to win the most seats, you will go along with it. And by that very nature, hopefully, you will change your whole attitude. Because you will be then forced to work with people across different demarcators. Whereas previously, if you have ethnic voting, a majority of the seats were based on communalism, then you won't necessarily have to do that.
No.
You live in your little holes, in your little corners, in your little boxes.
And not progress.
Yeah, no progress, of course. You know, we have a ridiculous situation. We used to have a ridiculous situation. If you were to out campaigning, assuming you were deemed to be an Indo-Fijian, as they would say, an Indian, I was deemed to be an other.
Not an Indian Fijian?
No, not indigenous, no Indo-Fijian. So I'm an other. If you and I were to go and campaign, we walk on the street, you would go and knock on the door and look for what they call an Indian house.
Mm-hmm.
You say, no, sorry, you know, you say, is it an Indian house? No, go down 3 houses. I would then go and look for other house. Somebody else would go and look for that, those days would say a Fijian house, or Itauke house. But, so you all campaign separately. When there's no water, when there's no electricity, when there's poverty, when there's potholes on the road, who do they go to? Who is your constituency?
Mm.
It should be everybody from that area.
Potholes don't discriminate on race. No water.
Nor does poverty.
Yeah.
Nor does poverty.
That's right.
Nor does electricity cuts. Nor does lack of education.
Thank you very much for your time.